First Chronicles chapter 11. I've titled this message tonight, Joab, a proven man of initiative and action. And as I've read through the Chronicles here, I've tried to find things that I could preach on, and this is one of them. I've preached on the previous chapter about the mighty men of David, and that truly is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. I have many, but that is one of them. I love reading the accounts of what those men did, and of course soldiering and that sort of thing has always appealed to me from the time that I was young, and that portion of Scripture is no different. And I was reading it yesterday, I guess, or maybe this morning, I don't remember, and reading this and thinking, these guys were just incredible men, and the things that they did were incredible, and they were really unstoppable when they decided that they were going to do whatever it was they were going to do. And of course, speaking of just the first three that it speaks of in that chapter, the chief of the mighty men. This is back in, or this is the early part of. Well, I hope I'm in the right chapter here. First Chronicles chapter 11. Huh? No, I'm good. I was like reading this, and but this is later then, not earlier. And it says, and these also are the chief of the mighty men whom David had, who strengthened themselves with him in his kingdom, with all Israel, to make him king according to the word of the Lord concerning Israel. And this is the number of the mighty men whom David had, Joab, so he's the very first on the list. And Hachmonite, the chief of the captains, he lifted up his spear against 300 slain by him at one time. Doesn't say by him and his friends, it says by him by himself. And after him was, Eleazar the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, who was one of the three mighties. He was with David at Pasdamim, and there the Philistines were gathered together to battle, where there was a parcel of ground full of barley, and the people fled from before the Philistines, and they set themselves in the midst of that parcel and delivered it, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord saved them by a great deliverance. And it speaks of that in another place. He just decided that he was going to stand, and everybody else fled, and he defeated the Philistines by himself over a field of beans. And it says the other ones came back only to spoil. Okay? And then the best of it is in verse 15 down. It says, now 3 of the 30 captains, it's talking about these first 3, went down to the rock to David into the cave of Adullam, and the hosts of the Philistines encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And David was then in the hold, and the Philistine garrison was then at Bethlehem. And David longed and said, oh, that one would give me drink of the water of the well of Bethlehem that is at the gate. And of course, Bethlehem is where he was from. And the 3 brake through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. But David would not drink of it, but poured it out to the Lord, and said, my God forbid it me that I should do this thing. Shall I drink the blood of these men that have put their lives in jeopardy? For with the jeopardy of their lives they brought it. Therefore he would not drink it. These things did these 3 mightiest. And you think about that, there was an entire garrison of Philistines stationed at Bethlehem. And David was from there, and obviously there was a little bit of nostalgia and sentimentality, and he was on the run, he was in the hold, and he just says offhand, oh, that I could get a drink of that water of that well. And those 3 men just took it upon themselves to bust into that, through that garrison, get ladle of water and take it back to David. That's quite incredible when you think about it, what they did. And he poured it out as an offering to the Lord. But as I was reading that, I was thinking, about, and reading a little bit earlier, I had read about Joab. And out of all of them, Joab was their chief. Okay? He was the chief captain. He was the generalissimo. He was the supreme allied commander. He was like a 5-star general. He was next to David. There was David, then Joab, then the army. And so think about that for a second. It doesn't mention Joab in the list of the 30 or whatever, however many were, 33, however many mighty men there were. But he was, in fact, over them. And if you go back a little bit, did I pray? Let's pray. Our Father, we come before you and ask for your help tonight as we preach. In Jesus' name, amen. And you read a little bit earlier in verse 4, and they had made David king, and David and all Israel went to Jerusalem, which is Jebus, where the Jebusites were, the inhabitants of the land. And the inhabitants of Jebus said to David, probably not a good thing to say, "Thou shalt not come hither." Nevertheless, David took the castle of Zion, which is the city of David. And David said, "Whosoever smiteth the Jebusites first shall be chief and captain." So Joab, the son of Zeruiah, went first up and was chief. And I thought, man, Joab was quite incredible in his own right. He was quite incredible in his own right. And I thought about Joab, and it's very similar to what Caleb said. I mentioned it on Sunday when he said that whosoever takes, is it Deber? And he said, whoever takes Deber is going to get my wife, get my daughter to wife, not my wife, get my daughter to wife. And I was thinking, perhaps Caleb knew Othniel would take the mountain. Right? Perhaps he didn't. But I think, and I thought those are strange ways to, that's a strange way to give out your daughter, or a strange way to give out the command of your army, right? Wouldn't you think so? By today's standards, that would be kind of, if I said something like that about my daughters, or you said something like that, I was like, well, that's not the way we do things typically today, right? But I think the issue was that, and what Caleb understood was that, and David, was that whoever did it was the one who would be worthy to get his daughter, would be worthy to get the command of the army. In other words, it was a test. It was a proving ground. Okay? And later, it proved in Caleb's case to be a good choice because Othniel became the first judge of Israel after Joshua. And his name, as I preached earlier a few weeks back, meant Lion of God. He certainly lived up to that name. And what's interesting, Joab, like David, was a descendant of Kenaz, who was the father of Othniel. So they were in the same line. So maybe the genes just filtered on down. Truth be told, David, out of all of the mighty men, and Joab was the mightiest of them all. He truly was a force to be reckoned with. No question about it. And he proved that when he went out and fought the giant as a young man, about probably Micah's age, and went out and took a sling and stones with him and no armor, and smote the giant in the forehead, and the giant died, and then he cut off his head. So they lived in a different time than we lived in. There's no question about it. 14-year-old kids going out and fighting giants and chopping their heads off is not something the average 14-year-old does today, right? But what did it prove? Well, it proved something about David, right? It showed Israel that David was in fact a lion. He was a man that was worthy to follow. It showed also that he had leadership ability, because he was running around, who is this Philistine, right? That curses the armies of the living God. And, at that point it was just talk. And then he went out and showed, well, this is how you do it. And we know later on the people ascribed tens of thousands to David and only thousands to Saul, which stuck in Saul's side, right? So David was, in his own right, an incredible soldier, an incredible man, an incredible warrior, a proven man. But so was Joab. And whatever you say, well, Joab was this and that. He was. Joab had some real moral character flaws. There's no question about it. Joab did things, even at that time, that were considered bad. He murdered his rivals, okay? That's bad at any time. And he murdered them in a way that was bad. He didn't murder them in fair fight. He murdered them under the guise of friendship, right? So he wasn't what we would call a nice guy, okay? Nevertheless, the army followed him. David trusted him with his armies. And the men, it seems, would have done anything for him, just like they would for David. And those mighty men that we just read about, they worked for Joab. And you have to understand, in a man's world like that, you don't lead. Men won't follow you just because you have a name, or they won't follow you just because you're so-and-so. In other words, like nobility. They had to prove who they were. They had to prove that they were worthy to be followed. They had to prove that they were somebody that could effectively take them into battle. And so I think that's why David said what he said, just like Caleb did with Othniel, or with whomever, right? Whoever takes this hill gets my daughter to wife. And his daughter, I was thinking, there'd be a lot of people today, feminists, well, that's not the way you do things. Probably she was on the same page with Dad. She's probably like, I don't want a guy that's some, stay behind in the tent type of guy, retire. I want a guy that's going to go take that mountain, right? And of course he did. He was that man. But there are a number of things here we see. It says, and so David issues the command, and David said, whosoever. So maybe David knew Joab would be the guy. Joab was his cousin. Or maybe he didn't. But whatever, he said, whosoever goes up and smites them. So David was kind of an equal opportunity employer, right? Right. It was a merit-based opportunity. It was not because your name is Joab, because you're my cousin, because we're both descendants of Kenaz and Othniel. No, whoever actually does the job is the one who's going to get the job. So he was equal in that sense. It was an equal opportunity. And but what would it prove? It would prove the mettle of the man. It would prove the courage of the man. It would prove the initiative of the man. And that was a day when physical prowess and courage was equated with real manliness. In fact, I would actually suggest that that's still equated, if people are honest, with real manliness too, okay? Truth be told, but maybe I'm wrong. But anyway, this was a good test. And the things about Joab were this. One, he did have initiative. We're talking about proven qualities. He did have leadership ability. Now, I believe that some people are born with leadership ability, and I believe that there are people who learn leadership ability. But I believe that a person who doesn't necessarily consider themselves a natural born leader can be a leader. They can learn to lead, right? And Joab led by example. And Joab was proven. Those four things, he was proven. And I was thinking, well, you say, well, how does that apply to us, or how does that apply to life? How does that apply to now? Well, it's the very same thing, right? I mean, it might apply here in the church. It might apply in the home with the kids, right? It might apply on your job. It's the same, in churches, people should get the job, whether it's the pastor or deacon or song leader or whatever it is, they should get the job because they've proven that they can do the job, right? They don't get the job just because they necessarily want the job. There are probably other people that wanted to marry Caleb's daughter. I'm just saying. There were probably other guys out there, suitors, who, thought, she's a nice girl, I'd like to marry her. But Caleb had other plans. It's like, you want to marry my daughter, you're going to go take that hill. And Othniel charged up the hill, right? And David, I am sure there are other men there. I mean, we're talking, is alpha male thing a real thing, right? I don't know. Alpha, beta. Now they have zeta males, right? I think I'm a zeta male. But anyway, in a crowd of alpha men, and these were alpha men. Hashabim was an alpha man. Abishai was an alpha man. Asahel, these were alpha guys. I mean, these were tier 1 operators, right? And I am sure that some of them would have thought, I'd like that job too. I can do that job, right? But who was it that went in and smote them when David said, whoever? Joab was the first one there. He did the job first, and he did it well. So he got the job, right? So he showed the initiative that he had. Again, all these guys had initiative. I mean, when David just says, I want to drink a water of the well of Bethlehem, and the three guys just take off on their own and break through, that's initiative. But Joab apparently had more than anybody else. He had leadership ability. He was able, and we know this from subsequent books and, the books previous to this, whatever else Joab was, character-wise, he was a man who could lead men. He proved that he could lead men. So he wasn't like taking on something that he hadn't proven that he could do. And that's important, right? And leaders lead by example. Okay? Now you say, well, generals lead from the back. Yeah, nowadays they do, because I guess the armies are so big. But back in the day, the generals were right out there with their troops, fighting right alongside of their troops. And cowardice was definitely frowned on. Okay? And so Joab was right out there in the thick of things. And in fact, his brother ended up being a lieutenant of Joab's. That's Abishai. And he was no slouch. He was one of the mighty men. But the thing about Joab is that, so he had that initiative, he had that leadership ability, and he led by example. And I tell you, I was thinking, this would apply to anybody today, right? It applies in the church. If you want to do things in the church, you have to prove that you can do them, that you will do them. It's often been said, you make someone a deacon right? I'm using a deacon just because that came to mind. But, you make someone a deacon who's already deaconing, right? They're already doing the work. They already have a servant's heart, right? And so it's not that waiting for that opportunity. They make the opportunity, even if they don't. They do what it is that they should be doing, right? So you make someone a deacon who's already a deacon, or a preacher. You make someone a preacher who's. I mean, generally it's pretty obvious, right? Someone is a preacher, wants to preach, and so on. It's more than just wanting to preach, but has the ability to preach, right? Pastor and lead a church. And, or song leaders. I mean, those are really the three positions here we have, right? Someone who has initiative, who has shown the ability to lead, has proven themselves. And that's important. Or in the home, right? We would, children, this is something you need to understand. You may want this or that. You want this responsibility, or you want this, or, Mom or Dad, I can do this, or whatever. Well, that's fine. Good. But you have to do it, right? We were talking, they were wearing their little house outfits. And somehow we got on the subject of cow patties today. And I said, they used to use them as fuel. They dry out. But, something I'm thankful for is that when I drive down the streets of Laconia, that they're not primarily manure and mud mixed in with it. That's the way streets used to be. You drive down the street, if you fell in the street back in the day, you basically falling. Kale's back there. Oh, I'm like, yeah, that's the way it was. That was just life. That's how it was. And so Hannah has repeatedly said she wants a horse, right? And I have repeatedly said, I'll get you a plastic horse, which she got a nice plastic horse for Christmas. A little horse. She likes those. She's happy with those. But I said, real horses are a whole different story. They're big. They can kick you out the other side of the stall. But I said, they're also dirty. I said, you got to go in every single day, and you have to clean that stall out. Every day you have to clean the stall. You have to put food and hay and water in. And she's like, well, you have pitchforks. You don't have to do it with your hands. Yeah. But, I mean, the key here is I can't afford a horse. We're not getting a horse. But if I could, it'd be like, you would have to prove that every single day you could get up and go out and take care of the horse. Not for the first 3 days while it was exciting and new. But the second week and the third week and the third month and the fourth month and the fifth month and the fifth year, you'd have to take care of it, right? So that's a big thing, a big horse, but we could scale it way down too, right? You want to do things, you want responsibility, because isn't that true? Kids, they do. They oftentimes, as they grow, they want responsibility. I want to do this, I want to do that, and that's good, but they have to earn that. You have to earn it. You have to prove that you can take it, that you can do it. Or if you're on the job, it's something I've taught the boys. Don't go on the job entitled. Don't go on the job thinking you're it, that you deserve it, whatever, right? I mean, I'm looking at Mark, and he's pretty much a man's world, right? Some young guy comes on there with you older guys, and he thinks he's better and knows everything. He's probably not going to get very far, I would imagine. Is that true? He's not going very far. Why? He has to prove himself. He has to prove that he can do the job, right? And so the lesson here that we're being taught is that, across the board, whether it's in the home or it's in life, or it's at work, I was reading this the other day, the new chief of staff of Trump. It's a woman. She's 70 years old. What's her name? Does anyone know her name? Anyway, I read the article the other day, and she has said that anyone who comes on to the White House staff is going to be a team player. Okay? They're not going to be a showboater. They're not going to have glory. That's one of the reasons Trump actually hired her, because she doesn't want the glory. And she said, and they're going to have to work, listen to this word, punishing hours. Punishing hours. What a kind of a job description is that? You come work here and you're going to work punishing hours. Now she's 70. 70 years old. And she's running a tight ship. I think Trump is a high energy dude. And that's what he wants. He works punishing hours and he's 78. But the point is, she's proved herself to him that she can rule the roost. And she expects those who come to her and works there for her and for Trump, obviously, that they're going to prove that they can do exactly what she wants them to do. And so it's a merit-based system. And even within churches, it's really a merit-based system. It's not, just because we're benevolent and kind, we just let everybody do whatever they want because they just decide that they want to do it. Nothing would get done. Nothing would happen. You imagine if every guy that just decided he wanted to be a pastor let's just make him a pastor. Can he lead? No. Can he preach? No. Can he do anything? Well, probably, but as far as pastoring is concerned, no, right? But hey, we're just being nice. It's a merit-based system. It's a merit-based system. And, we just like everywhere else. Now, we treat people nice, but when people do or want to do something or want to have a position, then they have to prove that they can. That to show that they have the initiative and the ability, right? They had to prove themselves first. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with parents testing and proving their children. Right? Showing that they actually can do what is, maybe what they want to do, or sometimes, or learning to do what they don't want to do. How often do children, what's the difference between a child and an adult? Or at least should be one of the key differentiating factors. Well, children don't seem to understand that they don't they have to do what they don't want to do. Right? Adults, men, understand, men and women, understand that they have to do what they don't want to do regardless, right? We're not talking about sin. Right? We're just talking about doing what we have to do. That's the difference. And that's where Paul says, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I spake as a child. I did what children do, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. And we would understand, too, that, we have to prove ourselves. We prove that I just think it's a good portion. Because it really shows that how God deals with things. Even in the New Testament, where it talks about the parable of the talents. And I've thought about that in relation to this. One servant was given 1 talent. One servant was given 2 talents. And one servant was given 5 talents. And obviously, in the mind of the Lord, he had an idea of who would do what. But the guy who had 5 talents had more than all the rest of them, even if they doubled everything. Right? But he doubled he gave 100%, and the guy who got 2 got 100% back. He only had 2, and even after 100%, he only had 4, which was still less than what the first guy got with 5. But it was 100%. But the guy who had 1, well, he proved himself. So you can prove yourself either way, right? You can prove who you are by not doing what it is you're supposed to do. And so he took the 1 talent and he went and buried it. And that proved what he was. And he was called slothful, right? So, it goes both ways. And the 2 guys the guy that got 10, it's interesting that the guy that got 10 and the guy that got 4, both were welcomed into the joy of their Lord, and they were given a lot. And it doesn't even differentiate at that point in between the reward. In other words, they both got to rule over a lot. Be thou ruler over a lot. Because they both proved themselves worthy. And so I think that's a good, it's important to understand that. That even in God's economy, that it's not salvation. That's not a merit-based system. You're not saved according to merit. God is no respecter of persons. But that's the point. God is no respecter of persons. And God expects us to treat people that way. If of course this is a small church and and so on, or in your family it's a small unit or whatever at your job. But you think about it. If on your job you want to be known as a good worker, right? You want to get promotions, you want to get raises, whatever. Then you have to prove that you're worthy of, right? Promotion and raise. You have to show that you're a good worker. Just going to your boss and saying, you might tell him that when you have an initial interview, I'm a good worker, right? I used to have people come in and tell me, I'm honest. Okay. Well, let's see if you are. All right. Someone comes in and says, I'm honest. Some of the most dishonest people I ever met were the ones that came in and gave me a card and they played the Christian game on it. They had the little fish on their card, and especially once they knew that, and I'm like, you probably ought to back off on that, right? And they've turned out to be some of the most dishonest people. They prove themselves just the opposite. Or children, you want your parents to think you're, and you should, honest and obedient and hardworking and responsible. Then be honest, obedient, hardworking, and responsible. Prove to them that you can be that, right? Prove to them that you can be that. Show them. Don't tell them. It's easy to say. And that's the point. Caleb just didn't hand off his, I want to say wife again, but his daughter. He made someone show that they were worthy of, I bet she was quite a woman, to be honest with you. Right? It was going to take quite a man. And, and not just anybody. And the same with leading the armies of Israel. David wanted someone who could actually do the job. So David wanted someone who had initiative, who had a leadership ability, who would be followed by the other courageous and active men that followed David. And it took someone like Joab to do it. But he had to prove it. Whoever smites the Jebusites, he's chief captain. And Joab went up. See, think about that. That's a good life principle to follow. That we go through life with that idea that we're going to show. It goes back, by the way, to our testimony, all of it. We're going to prove our Christianity by who we are, by how we act, by what we do.